Their work has begun. They're on the ground in Ethiopia. That project will take about 3 months. But it is not, it's not going to be ultimately a criminal investigation. It's going to be a documenting of what's happened. It's critically important, and it's a critical first step toward holding people to account for what they have done, holding those who have committed crimes to account. What will be important is another step on transitional justice to really, again, hold those people responsible to account. And that's something we will also commit to working on, and it is important. Ultimately, the only way to stop these things from happening, whether it's in Ethiopia or anywhere in the world, is to hold those responsible accountable. So we're committed to doing that.
Well, I agree with that statement. It's chilling. I mean, Mr. Charles, your testimony is chilling that we may have, again, a conflict-induced famine in Ethiopia, which people are going to die as a result of the activities of those that are abusing the rights of others. So is there a time schedule in regards to the review on either war crimes or crimes against humanity? That's a term that the international community fully understands and recognizes, and U.S. leadership here is going to be critically important. Do we have a time frame as to when we can expect that review to be completed?
Senator, the review is ongoing even as we sit here today. The final decision on that is the Secretary of State's. I can't give you a specific timeline. I can promise you we'll continue the review and make a decision.
Can we have your commitment that you will keep this committee informed as to that process and the likely time frame in which a decision will be made?
I do commit to that, Senator.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Coons.
Thank you, Chairman Menendez and Ranking Member Risch. And I just want to open by saying how appreciative I am for your personal active engagement, to have a full committee hearing on this topic, to have a clear and forceful public statements and active diplomacy from the administration, and your editorial jointly with the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee was very forceful and very clear about the path forward and challenges Prime Minister Abe and the leadership of Ethiopia to take steps now to change course, and lays out what might happen if that is not the case. Ambassador Godek, great to see you again. I've enjoyed serving with you, knowing you for many years, and greatly appreciated the chance to travel to Ethiopia with you. And Ms. Charles, thank you for your service at USAID and your work to address the humanitarian crisis in Tigray. As has been remarked, I traveled to Ethiopia in March 18th to the 22nd as a personal emissary of our president to speak with Prime Minister Abe and to convey President Biden's grave concerns about the conflict in Tigray and other regional challenges, the GERD, Al-Fashaga border disputes, and the situation within Ethiopia, violence in other areas, but in particular, the humanitarian crisis in Tigray, the presence of Eritrean troops, the lack of accountability for human rights violations, and the urgent need for a ceasefire. And then 3 weeks ago, I traveled with fellow committee member Chris Van Hollen to Sudan, as well as to the UAE, and had very constructive meetings in Khartoum, but also visited the Kuba refugee camp at the eastern border of Sudan, a refugee camp filled overwhelmingly by Tigrayan refugees, and heard firsthand about the horrors this conflict has inflicted on the Ethiopian people. Now in its 7th month, this conflict is estimated to have killed thousands and left as many as 6 million in desperate need of aid. And as we've heard from the witnesses, rape and other forms of sexual violence are widespread and systematic. And after months of intense diplomatic efforts, I support the Biden administration's decision to apply visa restrictions on all who are fueling the violence in Tigray. So, Ambassador, I want to talk, if I can, with you about the status of Ethiopia's transition. Many of us were very encouraged by Prime Minister Abe's initial rise and initial opening of space for civil society, the release of political prisoners, the allowing of banned political parties to participate. And his rise to power was facilitated by years of widespread protests against government policies and brutal repression. He shared an inspiring vision of Ethiopia that inspired people in his country and around the world. But the protest movement that largely brought him to power was led by young men in Oromia in prison or who have joined armed groups. How would you assess Prime Minister Abe's vision of the transition compared with its current reality on the ground?
Thank you, Senator, and it's a pleasure to see you again as well. We certainly share the view that when Prime Minister Abe came to power, he presented a vision that was attractive and hopeful of opening up the country, of expanding democracy, of giving people more rights. Unfortunately, the implementation of that has not met, I think, all of the hopes. We're deeply concerned about the closing of the political space, the reality that many politicians have been arrested, some are in prison, that there have been, there was some opening of the media, issues with reporters being jailed, international reporters such as Simon Marks being expelled from the country, are significant issues in the implementation of this vision, which is why we believe at this point the only path forward is an inclusive dialogue that involves all the parties. This election, which is sure to take place, is one thing, but we need the dialogue to make progress.
Two more questions if I'm in my limited time. Ms. Charles, in your assessment, is the humanitarian situation in Tigray getting better or worse? And are Ethiopian authorities becoming better or worse partners in addressing the ongoing humanitarian crisis?
First of all, thank you for your continued engagement on this and your travel in March. I think after your visit and high-level engagement from others in the administration, we did see some progress, including the lifting of regulations that required our partners to get permission to travel in Tigray. But we continue to see access restrictions from the government, critically around visas and importation of communication equipment that is necessary for our partners to scale and maintain operations in a very insecure environment.
Thank you. Last question. Ambassador Godek, in March, I met a prime minister who was charismatic and compelling, who had a forceful vision, and who reassured me, made a commitment to me and to our president that Eritrean troops would leave Ethiopia and Tigray. And in fact, he promptly flew to Asmara, met with Isaias, and said that he had demanded that Eritrean troops leave. It is now nearly June, and there's been no progress I'm aware of towards meeting that commitment. And reports just broke this week that jointly Eritrean and Ethiopian soldiers have forcibly rounded up and detained more than 500 young men and women from IDP camps in the area of Shire. What's your assessment of how closely Ethiopian and Eritrean security forces are coordinating? And what accountability would you expect if those detained folks are harmed and not released?
Our assessment, Senator, is that the Ethiopian and Eritrean forces are cooperating very closely up in Tigray, and it is obviously a source of serious concern. This latest report that people were detained, IDPs were detained, is extremely grave. We have already raised this with the Ethiopian government. The UN has raised it with them. Obviously, if these folks are harmed, if these individuals are harmed, it's unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. We will continue to be very forceful on this point.
Mr. Chairman, your editorial lays out a clear series of next steps that might well be taken if this situation continues to deteriorate. It is my real hope that Prime Minister Abe will yet hear the offers of the world community in the United States to work together to declare a ceasefire, to resolve the humanitarian crisis, to deliver accountability for crimes against humanity that have been committed by a range of parties, and step back from a conflict that I think threatens the entire future of Ethiopia. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you for your good work in this regard. Senator Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to both of you for your work and appearing before the committee today. Ambassador, let me thank you for raising in response to Senator Coons' general question, the specific issue related to press freedom. Senators Cardin and Leahy and myself have raised this in several different ways. And of course, we all around the world stand for the idea that no government should curtail the right of the press to be able to tell objective stories about what's happening on the ground, but in particular in Ethiopia and Tigray, we depend on the ability of journalists to be able to translate to the world what is happening and to be able to inform us as to the extent of the atrocities. Appreciate you continuing to focus on that question. I wanted to drill down, Ms. Charles, on one specific issue, and I don't know if it's been raised, forgive me if it has been, on the humanitarian front, and that is the Ethiopian government's refusal to provide visas to international humanitarian staff and parties that are trying to get into Tigray. Just wanted to get an update as to whether we foresee any progress in getting more aid workers into Tigray, and what are the roadblocks that are standing in the way of these requests?
For that question, we continue to ask for extended visas for humanitarian workers, 6-month visas, as well as allow for the importation of critical communications equipment. Both of these items are very important when operating in such a difficult and complex environment as we see in Tigray, and we have not yet seen any progress from the government of Ethiopia on either of those requests, in spite of it being raised at the highest levels and consistently over the last several months.
What's the consequences of not being able to get a greater flow of willing humanitarian organizations? I mean, what a triumph that there are organizations that are willing to go into these areas and help people despite the risks. What are the consequences of these visas not being granted?
Well, the consequence of continued obstruction by all parties, including the government of Ethiopia, is that we will be facing the first widespread famine in Ethiopia since the 1980s. We need the government of Ethiopia to cooperate with our humanitarian partners to allow for the scale-up of assistance that's necessary to avert the worst.
Mr. Gode, I just was hoping that you might talk to us a little bit about the influence of Gulf nations, the UAE and the Saudis. Obviously, the UAE has been an important player, probably highlighted by the 2018 normalization agreements. Some talk has recently been centered around their withdrawal militarily from some of their basing operations. I would just note that open source reporting suggests the UAE is at the same time building up a fairly substantial capacity on an island off of Yemen, purpose to be determined. What can you say about, in particular, the UAE, but more broadly, the Gulf's influence, their ability to be a partner or a obstruction to the path to peace that we're seeking?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Since the early days of the conflict in Tigray, we've been speaking with both the UAE and Saudi Arabia officials about the crisis, about the conflict. We have asked them to intervene, to use their influence. Both countries have both personal connections and commercial connections, and they do have influence, particularly the Emirates. And they have expressed to us their concern as well about what's happening in Ethiopia and in Tigray. We understand they have raised these concerns. We have a continuing discussion with them and are hopeful that they will continue to press our concerns forcefully. I would note that Special Envoy Feltman, when he travels next week, will be one of his stops. One place he will be going is the Gulf, so he will be stopping in the Emirates, Saudi, for conversations.
Yeah, I note it was not likely coincidental that Senator Coons made a stop in the UAE recently. Listen, I think we have plenty of equities at play with the UAE right now. Their security our security partnership with them is important to us, but it's more important to them. And to the extent that they continue to have leverage, this is a moment that we should press them on this case. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ranking Member Risch, and thank you to our witnesses for your service in a very difficult circumstance. It's depressing to contemplate the atrocities in Tigray, the upcoming election, which is of questionable legitimacy and could lead to more strife and violence, the dispute between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt over the dam project, that in and of itself, that could also lead to military action in an extreme situation. Ms. Charles, tell us about the USAID partner worker who was killed.
First of all, I thank you for raising that. I want to send my condolences out to his family. This was the first time that we've lost a partner in Tigray, where it was clear that they had identified themselves as a humanitarian worker. We believe that they were targeted as such, and it marks really a quite concerning and tragic turn in the crisis.
You know, sometimes, despite the best intention and the best effort, we can't find the path forward to fixing situations that are so deep-rooted in cultures that are not our own. But even when we can't make headway, sometimes in solving these seemingly intractable problems, we do stand for American values by delivering humanitarian aid. And so the targeting of a humanitarian worker, it's the one thing that we can do that shows that we care and we're there and we're consistent, even if other efforts aren't bearing fruit. But that means the protection of humanitarian aid workers becomes paramount. What, in your experience at in your previous experience, but now at USAID, what can we do to provide better protection for our humanitarian workers in Tigray, but using it as an example of in other dangerous situations as well?
We've certainly worked to scale up the security focal points that we have on our disaster assistance response team, also back here in Washington, that are working very closely with our partners on their security planning. But I want to be very clear, it is the parties to this conflict that are making our partners less safe. It is their decisions to block and obstruct and harass humanitarian workers, and it's one of the reasons why we continue to press on the government of Ethiopia, both to send the message to their troops about the importance of humanitarian access, but also to allow for the importation of communication equipment, allow us to bring in the right kind of staff and coordination structures to provide the kind of security that our partners need.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kane. I want to tell Ms. Charles that I express the sympathies of the committee to our USAID Administrator, Ambassador Powers, on behalf of all. I think following up on Senator Kane's questioning, the death of anyone is something that we are concerned greatly about. The death of an aid worker, an American aid worker, from my perspective, is a high crime. And at the end of the day, it will only make it more difficult for us to do what is necessary to try to help Ethiopia out of the path that it's in. In that regard, let me ask you, how should the fact that the government of Ethiopia is a party to the conflict change how the international community engages with it relative to both protection needs and the delivery of aid in Tigray?
Thank you again for that, Senator Menendez. I do want to just quickly clarify, while it makes the death no less tragic, it was a local Ethiopian staff member, not an American aid worker that was killed, but no less
Equally as tragic.
No less tragic. And we certainly are working again with our UN partners, with our NGO partners to develop independent programs driven by humanitarian need, and really demanding from the government of Ethiopia and all parties to the conflict that they allow for that unhindered humanitarian access.
So how do we, so we are actively engaged in urging the Ethiopian government to do this, but if the Ethiopian government continues to be part of the challenge in the delivery of aid, is there any efforts, is there any ways in how we deliver that aid to circumvent them, or is that impossible?
We certainly are pursuing any number of methods to deliver assistance. We don't deliver assistance in Tigray through or with the government of Ethiopia. We deliver it independently. But of course, the government of Ethiopia has a lot of control in Tigray over our ability to move freely, our ability to bring the right staff and equipment in, and we continue to press for them to do that unhindered.
Ambassador Godek, Tigray is rightly the focus of a lot of our attention at the moment, but I'm also worried about violence and atrocities in other regions of Ethiopia, civilians from communities, but not limited to Ethiopia's two largest, Amhara and Oromo. What accounts for this specific violence?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there is intercommunal, interethnic violence in many areas across Ethiopia. There's a number of drivers of this conflict. Some of them are boundary disputes. Some of it's related to conflict over pastoral lands, areas. There's a number of drivers to this. We do have a number of programs run mostly through USAID and OTI to help address some of the conflicts that are out there. Frankly, the lifting of, in the recent years of some of the restrictions that were in place have had the perverse effect of allowing some of this to boil up. And what's critical is that the government itself takes steps again to address the conflicts between these communities. We can, through our programs, help, but a broader effort does need to be really initiated, and it needs to be real, and it needs to be serious if these conflicts are going to be brought to an end, to address these longstanding disputes.
I understand Senator Booker is with us virtually.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Please proceed.
Thank you so much. I'm grateful for this hearing and for the time the State Department has spent with me on Horn of Africa issues. If I could just jump right in, it's been really horrific, the reports that I've been reading and hearing about violence and sexual violence against women and girls as young as 8 years old. It has been gruesome to hear. And frankly, it's coming from a number of different forces, not just the Eritreans, these are accusations at least, but the NDF as well as Amhara. And I just want to know from both of you, if I can, what are your thoughts about our ability to deal with this, the trauma and violence and the survivors of this trauma and violence? Obviously, we're talked a lot in this hearing about food aid and other humanitarian aid, but this is the scale of the accusations makes me believe that our government and aid agencies should be thinking about that as well.
Thank you for that question, Senator Booker. It is a top priority of our humanitarian response to respond to what you rightly characterized as just horrific incidents of gender-based violence as part of this conflict. So we're working with partners to train social workers, provide safe spaces for women and girls, psychosocial support, and counseling for survivors of gender-based violence.
Ambassador, would you please give me some input as well?
Senator, let me just say that certainly from my perspective as well, these reports are horrifying. The administration does raise the reports of gender-based violence, rape, gang rape, regularly and at top levels with the government. I would note that Ambassador Passy was recently in an IDP camp in Tigray and personally spoke with some of the victims of this violence. She took their graphic and horrible stories back to the Prime Minister and other officials in the government just to stress the importance of addressing this really terrible situation. So it is something we are very much focused on and working to hopefully stop.
And Ambassador, if I could stay with you for a second, I know one of my previous colleagues asked a bit about the influence of the UAE, Qatar, Saudi Arabia in the region. And I'm wondering if you could just take a couple steps with more detail for me about, in general, our efforts and theirs in conflict, or are they? Do you see them as a force that's of making a greater positive influence, or making the situation more difficult? Obviously, these are some of our allies, and I'm just curious your overall take on coordination and influence in the region.
Thank you, Senator. I do think that they have significant influence in the region, given their, again, personal connections, the commercial connections that they've got, the investments that have been made. Certainly, the Emiratis have been involved in negotiations, for example, previously, to some degree successfully. They've also sought to engage on the Al-Fashaga border dispute, although in the last few days they have indicated they're pulling back from that. So they have played an important role. What's critical, I think, is that they use all of the influence that they've got in order to help to bring the Tigray conflict to an end, and hopefully also to address the other challenges that Ethiopia faces. That they're clear in their communications with Prime Minister Abiy and other officials in the government about the concerns that we have. And I just assure you that we are talking with them in detail constantly at this point about doing that.
And Ambassador, just if I can keep your mic on for a little bit longer, just to ask you, we're heading into this period where it seems to me, unless you give me more information, that the June 21st elections in Ethiopia are going to go forward, even though there's incredibly a lot of concerns with the ability for those elections to be done. And I know in the Tigray region that's not going to happen. And I guess I'm wondering, besides just calling for free and fair elections, is there anything that we can do in this run-up, 3 or 4 week run-up, to better ensure that there would be credible elections taking place? And just can you give me some of your general assessments of your concerns that you might have about the elections as well?
Thank you for the question, Senator. We do have many concerns about the elections. They're going to take place in an environment where there have been significant political limitations. Also, there are big logistical challenges around the elections. As I mentioned earlier, the IRI-NDI report lays those out. I think we have been clear in our communications with the government, with the National Election Board, about those concerns. There are specific steps that could be taken in a logistical sense that might help in the next 4 weeks, but I think it's going to be very difficult to really get all the way that the country needs to get to hold fully free, fair, and credible elections. That said, again, we withholding judgment, and we'll continue to urge progress on those challenges that are out there before the elections. And let me just emphasize again, what's really critical here is that there be an inclusive dialogue ultimately. One election is not going to solve the problems of Ethiopia. If there's not a understanding reached among the various communities about the way forward, it's a democratic way forward, there's going to be real trouble in our view.
I want to say thank you. My time's expired. Just 2 points I want to make. Number one, I just appreciate the State Department's willingness to meet with me and brief me independently on these issues. We are in the midst of, there's just a lot of strike points in this area that concern me. I know the ranking member already asked about the dam, the GERD Dam, and clearly all the way to what's going on in Tigray. But I think the most stunning thing that was said during this hearing is the prospects for the first time since, I guess, the 80s, that to have us have widespread famine, should we not be able to give humanitarian aid into the region. We are really teetering on the urge of just catastrophic humanitarian crisis in a region from Sudan, South Sudan, to Ethiopia, to Eritrea. We're just in Somalia. This is a a lot of challenges in this area. So I'm just hope that, I know that with Senator Menendez, we will continue to focus on this area. And I'm just really hopeful that I can continue the dialogue with the State Department to see ways that this committee could be doing more to keep focus on that area of the world and see some way out of what could be a true nightmare for all of humanity.
Senator, we certainly agree that Ethiopia is teetering on the brink at the moment, that alarm bells are going off, and that we need all hands on deck to address the challenges. On behalf of the State Department, I am certainly happy, I might know my colleagues are, to remain closely engaged with you personally, Senator, any member of this committee, either, again, individually or the committee as a whole. You have a critical role to play, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, Senator Menendez.
Thank you, Senator Booker. My understanding is I have no colleagues on either side who are with us virtually. Is that correct? Since I'm not hearing anybody, I assume so. I just have then two final questions. Ambassador, do we have a regional strategy for the Horn of Africa that no longer hinges necessarily on a close partnership with the Ethiopian government, even as we continue to support the Ethiopian people?
Senator, the Horn of Africa is clearly an increasingly significant region, and its stability and security really critical, obviously, to the people who live there, but there are implications throughout the Red Sea region. There are implications even up to the Mediterranean and across the Indo-Pacific area. Ethiopia has long been kind of a linchpin, central with its 110 million people, and it's been an important partner. It's at the heart of the region. Its stability is essential to peace and security, which is obviously one of the reasons why we're so focused on trying to address the challenges there. Now, the administration obviously has been hard at work trying to address the challenges in Ethiopia, but also looking at the entire region and how progress can be made, what the linkages are between the various conflicts, what the issues are across boundaries. We're still early in the administration, but I want to assure you that there is a robust conversation going on about how to bring all of this together in a way that makes sense.
Well, I appreciate that. Here's our problem, and it's not only unique to the Horn of Africa. Very often we pursue our strategic and national interests vis-a-vis a country, and that country doesn't pan out to be what we aspire and expect it to be. And if we wait until it's no longer the country we hope it to be, then we're in a world of hurt. So while I'm not for abandoning our aspirations for Ethiopia, I am for being strategic and planning to think about what will happen if that falls apart for a short or longer period of time. And I think we have enough challenges in that regard. I commend that to your attention. When I speak to the Secretary, I will do the same. Now, Ethiopian contributions to UN and AU peacekeeping, they're important, but we need to ensure that those who are implicated in atrocities are not rotated into peacekeeping missions. How do we intend to address that issue?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. We're in full agreement that it's very important that Ethiopian troops who are implicated in atrocities not be participating in peacekeeping operations. We are actively looking at that issue, and we're working to address it. It is a serious concern, and we're on it.
Well, part of the process of being able to address it is to identify those who have been involved in such atrocities and to name them so that we don't have their atrocities extend beyond Ethiopia and other parts of the world. And I think that's critically important. And then finally, I will make a comment. It's not a question. I've spoken to the Egyptians on more than one occasion on this issue at their behest. I have a real sense that if the GERD issue is not dealt with in a way that assures them of their concerns about the Nile flowing into what would be the heart of their water supply in Egypt, that they will do what is necessary. I don't like red lines, but they have suggested that they have red lines. And I take them at their word that they have red lines. Not that they are desirous of doing that. They also have a very strong expression that they hope to have a resolution peacefully, but that they have their own red lines. I hope that we are engaging in that very robustly, because the last thing we need, in addition to everything that is going on in Ethiopia, in addition to the possibility of a famine, to the sexual violence that is taking place, is to then have a military conflict over the GERD. So I just seriously hope we are fully engaged and understand where the parties are and how serious some of them are of purpose.
Senator, I can assure you that the administration up to the president are engaged on this matter, very concerned about it, and doing everything we can to resolve. Certainly agree that any sort of conflict over the GERD or Alpha Shaga would be catastrophic for the region, and it must be avoided. We're working hard to prevent any such conflict.
All right. Well, this hearing record will stay open to the close of business tomorrow, with the thanks of the committee for your testimony and your service. This hearing is adjourned.